This is a download from the BBC of the World Football Phone-In, which is broadcast as part of the Up All Night programme on 5 Live from 2:30am to 4am on Saturday mornings. Here's the latest edition.
Appropriately enough this morning, we're talking about the real skills of Africa as we mark the start of the Africa Cup of Nations in Ghana on Sunday. So we'd especially like to get your thoughts on African football. And tonight's panel of experts are, as always, the legendino Tim Vickery. Don't forget you can also send your questions to Tim anytime via his weekly South American football column on the BBC Sport website. And also with us tonight, our European expert Andy Brassell and our African experts Peter Law, and off the bench for the first time in about a year now, Durosimi Thomas, who's in the capital of Ghana, Accra. So your long-time injury is healed, is it, Durosimi?
Yes, I'm all fine.
and you're fit and raring to go. Well, we'll test you out for the first 10 or 15 minutes, and if you're feeling the pressure, we'll pull you off and give you a rest until the next one.
Okay.
So what's the atmosphere like in Ghana at the moment ahead of the African Cup of Nations?
Oh, as I say, fever pitch. It's electric. It's colourful. It's really happening. It's party time. You can feel it immediately you arrive at the airport. You know, it's all the buzz. I was at the airport yesterday. It was jam-packed. I think it's the busiest airport in West Africa at the moment, possibly, in the whole of Africa. And then, the street, everybody's in the Ghanaian colours. You can't feel it. You can't escape it. Even if you're in the hospital, in a supermarket, you can't hide from it. It's Nations Cup fever.
Well, World Football Phone-In goes all around the world. We'd like to get the view of the African Cup of Nations from South America, where Tim Vickery is in Rio. Do they follow that from over there, Tim?
Well, obviously they're more concerned with the start of their season here in South America, which is just about to get underway. But it is consistently shown on TV, usually only cable TV, so that restricts it a little bit. But it is growing. It's a paradox, I think, really, because the interest is less this year than it was 2 years ago, but I still think that the interest in general is growing. Why is that? Well, because 2 years ago, obviously, it's World Cup year. And in World Cup year, Argentina, they're drawn in the same group as Ivory Coast. So let's have a look at the Ivory Coast. Brazil, they might face Ghana in the second round. Let's have a look at Ghana. So in World Cup year, there's a desire to get to know the teams, the collectives. This time, it's not so much about the collective. It's much more about the individual stars. We know Drogba. We know Samuel Eto'o. We know Essien. Let's follow them. And I think they are bigger stars than in South America than any African footballers have been before. And last year, the fans of Flamengo here in Rio, they even had a chant about their centre-forward, Albino, saying that Albino is better than Eto'o. And the idea of an African player being a reference for a chance of South American footballers, well, a few years ago, that was unthinkable. So because of the globalisation of the game and African players playing at top European clubs, I think the interest in the tournament is growing.
We're not just going to talk about African football tonight, we're going to talk about European football and indeed South American football as well. And Tim, you won't be surprised to know there's already been a question from Christian in Hull about Alexandre Pato's glittering debut for Milan. We'll talk about that in just a moment or two, and our esteemed guests are here to answer any questions that you might have. Andy Brassell's in the studio with me, author of A Year in the Champions League, All or Nothing as it's called. Andy, it's not just teams here in Britain like Chelsea and Arsenal who are suffering because their players have gone off to the Africa Cup of Nations. I imagine teams in France are too, and elsewhere in Europe.
That's right. Of course, Tim made the point about the globalisation and the fact that Marcel Desailly said something very interesting earlier today about the fact that it's not really a place for European teams, the big European teams, to uncover jewels anymore, because we know all of the biggest players. We know Drogba, we know Essien, we know Eto'o. But France is particularly affected by this. If you think back to the 2002 World Cup, when 21 of the 22 Senegal players were actually playing their club football in France, and while those players are better spotted and moved on, a lot of them have moved on to higher leagues now, you do have something like 60-65 first team players from Ligue 1 in France who have left their clubs and playing for clubs in the African Cup of Nations. Most of the big teams in the African Cup of Nations, most of the favourites, have at least half a dozen players from the French league in their squads.
Sure, we'll perhaps talk about some of the biggest losses to the French league in just a moment or two. Peter Law joins us from Southend, but a keen, I suppose, follower of African football, I should say, Peter. Now, let me just tell our listeners, the reason why I respect your knowledge of this is once we sat at a mutual friend of ours' house and you said in the World Cup, watch this, he's going to score, and it was an African player, and he scored the next moment. You know what you're talking about. So who's going to win it?
Nigeria, I think, Dotun.
Well, that's nice and easy, controversial as well. I like some fans of Ghana and some of the other teams to pick up the phone and give us a call. Nice and... Oh, have we lost somebody? Hopefully we'll come back to them. Let's go straight to the callers, 0500 909 693. And Charles, you're the first first caller of the night, so welcome to you. Charles in Manchester, good morning.
It's to Tim and, well, anyone else who wants to answer it. It's about the globalisation of football, and I write for a student newspaper up here in Manchester, and I'm quite a keen sports journalist, and I was just thinking that obviously in the past few weeks you've had Rio Ferdinand organising his infamous party, you've had Joey Barton arrested, and in Spain you've had Manuel Fernandez getting arrested, and it just made me wonder about European players maybe going off the rails a bit, being influenced by alcohol and women or something, and it's the effect that it might have on South American players, and maybe this, the fact that Robinho and Ever Banega, I know, have been in hot water recently. Robinho, I think it was after the 5-0 victory against Ecuador. And it's just that they come over at such a young age to Europe, and whether the bad influences that they pick up in Europe, whether this is ultimately damaging to the international teams. For example, England haven't performed well, and I think this is perhaps a problem with their drink culture that they have especially amongst professional footballers, and whether South American teams are worried about this.
Let me just reinterpret the question very quickly, if I may, Charles, because we lost Durosimi for a moment. Tim, just bear with me. The question is basically whether football culture in Europe is influencing, or the globalisation of football and the bad behaviour of footballers in Europe is influencing football, not just in South America, and I presume, Charles, you mean in Africa and elsewhere as well?
Yeah, and I just think that it could be quite worrying, because Robinho was this fantastic player, and he came to Real Madrid and he struggled. He's getting better, admittedly, but I am not quite sure whether he would have been better staying in South America, where obviously they have to work harder because there's the issue of getting out of poverty.
Well, let's open this up as a debate to all of our correspondents with us, and all feel free to join in as well. No need for me to wait for me to introduce you, but Tim, you kick off.
I think there's a fantastic example of this at the moment with Adriano, who 2 or 3 years ago was the emperor. Looked like there was nothing that could stop him, and at the moment is now being forced to rebuild his career. He's on loan back at Sao Paulo. He had a terrific debut last night. He scored two goals, one an absolute cracker in his side's 2-1 win. I think we're seeing more inconsistency at the very top level of football than we used to see in the past. Now, the reasons for that, I think, are twofold. Number one, the potential rewards for the game are so much greater than they were now. You can play top-class football for 2 years and never need to work again. So those people who are motivated by money, well, that clearly does have an effect. Number two, the physical intensity of the game is greater than it ever was before. The demands, the sacrifices are needed. So at the same time as the rewards are greater, the sacrifices are also greater. So someone who's maybe played 2 years at the very top level, he might think, well, why do I need to go through those sacrifices anymore? And Adriano is a case in that. And he's had real problems with alcohol. But part of Adriano's problem, I think, comes right back to the question that you raised, Charles, of globalisation. Adriano is from just a desperately horrible area of Rio. Nothing to do at all with your picture postcards and your Christ the Redeemer statue and your Sugarloaf Mountain and all the rest of it. And where he grew up is just horrible. It's absolutely horrible. But there is a tight bond between some of the people there. Now, just to give you an example of the neighbourhood where Adriano grew up, Adriano's father had a bullet lodged in his skull for years as a result of just being caught up in a gangland fight there. Now, Adriano's father died last year, partly because of the complications of having a bullet lodged in his skull. This set Adriano off into a depression, and I really think that one of the things that he feels, that Adriano, part of this depression, is the fact that he just doesn't have a place in the world. Where does he belong in the world? He can't go back. I think there's a part of him, speaking to some people who know him and so on, there's a part of him that wouldn't actually mind going back to this area where he grew up, because it's the area where he feels at home, where his friends are. But he can't go back. With the amount of money that he has, you can't go back there. Where does he go forward to? Does he fit in Italy? Perhaps not. So he's drowning his sorrows in alcohol, and as a result reducing his effectiveness on the football field. So I think that there's a number of factors going on causing inconsistency at the very highest level of football, and Adriano for me is a wonderful example and a sad example, and let's hope that talent comes through and he gets back to being the emperor. But he's a terrific example of all of these forces which are swirling around.
But ultimately, the question is, European football culture is bad for the health of footballers from all around the world.
I'm not really sure that's so much the case. I think we've got to perspectivise this. Obviously, I think especially drink-related mishaps make more headlines these days because of the globalisation of football, and because it's so intensely studied, and because, as Tim says, it's so much more noticeable because such a higher physical standard is expected of players. But if you look at England as an example, I think no doubt, even if there are headlines involving players, because they are like pop stars nowadays, to use a cliched way as it's described in the press, I think that they are under that pressure. But on the other hand, they've also people talk about their responsibility, but I think the habits generally of players are actually better, and I think the foreign players bringing professionalism with them from Italy and from Spain and from France and from countries where you don't so much have that alcohol all the time culture, where you have more of a culture of moderation. I think on the whole, probably players' habits have improved as they've had to with the more physical intensity of the game. Now, I think it was interesting when you ask Arsenal players when they first had the likes of Vieira and Henry coming to Christmas parties. People were very, very surprised that someone like Patrick Vieira would drive to the Christmas party, have half a glass of wine, and then leave at 10:30, 11 o'clock. So I think we've got to get it in some sort of perspective.
Yeah, but surely, Durosimi, you can see the difference between the African footballers playing in Europe. When they come back for the Africa Cup of Nations, they look very different and behave, no doubt, differently from their African counterparts based in Africa.
Well, okay, already, they're treated like celebrities, so whether they come back home, whatever the case. But let me just give you the example of Mido, when he came back to play for the Nations Cup in Egypt 2 years ago, and he was about to be substituted, and he had this argument. I guess most of us remember that scene with the Egyptian coach. It's basically in the African culture, it's frowned upon when you begin to show some, kind of open indiscipline. Michael Essien, that controversial absence from that same Nations Cup when Ghana went out in the first round. Even though he was officially injured, most people think he was turning his back to his from his country. So it's like when it's like no matter what the influence is, when Africans watch TV, they see the way some players misbehave and that kind of thing, and want to bring that kind of reaction or influence back home when they come. It's really frowned upon. So you could probably have your day on the pitch, but off the pitch, people really don't tend to, they might go to you and, ask you for money, or they need help and all that kind of thing.
Durosimi, hold it just there. I just want to get Peter Law's view of this. You see both sides of the coin. Peter Law. Yeah, I was saying you see both sides of the coin from over here, but we're talking about the influence of European culture, footballing culture on, say, African players.
I think it teaches them generally a greater professionalism. Most of them have given up a lot, have got big families back home. They don't want to put it at risk in any way. So I think most of them generally stick to the straight and narrow. It's far less of a drinking culture, and I think they can really more perhaps appreciate what they're getting in Europe.
Okay, so 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. Cleo in Aldershot. Appreciate your calling, girl.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, I'd like to say to Peter,
Yes.
get yourself down to the betting shop because Nigeria are 13-2 to win the African Nations Cup. Good price. Anyway, I just want to congratulate my Adebayo boy. He's got the 2007 BBC African Player of the Year. Well done. Quick question to three, to Tim, about Pele's comments about Alexander Pato's debut. Had some negative live. Andy, does he know anything about a Bulgarian striker called Nikolai Dimitrov, because he had a trial for Arsenal? And the main African question is, should it be moved? Mr. Platter, who always has plenty to say, nothing always very worthwhile, has decided he wants by 2016 the African Cup of Nations to be moved to June or July, and also he wants it in the odd years as well, because in case it clashes with the Olympics and the World Cup.
Okay, let's take the 3 points. First of all, Pele.
I remember doing an interview with Dotun, who obviously was Pele's strike partner in the 1970 World Cup. We talked about Pele for a few hours. And he loves Pele, but there's one thing he said, that Pele is really very insecure and terrified that people are going to appear who's as good as he is. He's always terrified of his own prestige. And I remember those words because shortly afterwards, first game of the 2006 World Cup for Brazil, they were very laboured against Croatia. They won 1-0. Before the game, there'd been all sorts of talk about Ronaldinho. He's going to prove in that World Cup that he was better than Pele and so on. And after the game was over, Pele was running straight to the Brazilian media to say, "Oh, Ronaldinho didn't play very well, did he? He didn't play very well, did he? He wasn't very good, was he? He's not as good as I am, is he?" So Alexandre Pato has now come through. What we saw against Napoli on Sunday from the talent is absurd. It's absurdly talented. He's not going to have every day's not going to be as good as that for him. But he really is just an absurdly talented player. So here comes Pele, desperate to throw cold water. He's not going to be as good as I. No, he's not as good as I am. No, it can't be. I suppose. That was part of what made Pele Pele. His desire to be the best when he was a player. He was a player who was perhaps ahead of his time in terms of his physical conditioning. He always wanted to present himself in good physical condition, and he's still got that same competitive thing that he had when he was a player. Now about his prestige. So I think Alexandre Pato can be proud that he's just pricked the pride of Pele a little bit, because it shows that his potential really is extraordinary.
He played at Santos when he was 15. He played in the World Cup in Sweden when he was 17. So all this thing about him being young and not letting the media hype go to his head, and he's going to be man-marked off the field, and he's going to...
The media hype, and to be fair to Pele, and the media hype for Alexandre Pato is different from the media hype for Pele. When Pele was called up for the 58 World Cup, when the Brazil squad assembled beforehand, and the players from Rio, there was someone who didn't really know him, hadn't really heard of him. What's he like? Is he any good? And then they watched him in training and they saw, yeah, he really is good. Well, nowadays with the global media, it's difficult to hide quite as much. So there's a big magazine in Brazil, the kind of Hello style magazine, celebrities and their houses and their cheesy smiles and all the rest of it. And he's already been on the cover of it. Alexandre Pato has been on the cover of this magazine called Caras, which means faces, with his girlfriend who's a soap opera actress. So he's still got got all that. This magazine, it's called Caras Faces, and it's full of people showing their arse. So there was a satirist who set up his own magazine, and he called it Arses, and he said those people who've shown their arse in faces will not show their face in arses.
What's that noise in the background? Is Pele trying to break in and shut you up, Tim?
So the question about the Arsenal, the boy that Arsenal is having a look at, do you know anything about him?
No, I've not heard of him in short, so I'll look him up for you.
Okay, and the question about the African Cup of Nations, I want both Peter and Durosimi to come in on this. But first, let me bring Tony in Doncaster in, because you've got a similar question, haven't you, Tony?
Hello, morning, Dotun.
Hiya.
Morning to all the panel as well. It's really to the two African correspondents and Andy as well. As they say, I don't really care what Sepp Blatter said, but some managers have been saying as well that it should be moved. And what I'm actually thinking, the managers, some of them actually say it will affect African players in the long term. And I'm wondering, is that true? Because if you have a look at it, the big teams, Man United haven't bought any. I don't think they've ever really had any. And then you look at Liverpool's one, who's on the bench all the time. And then I know Chelsea lose a lot, and Arsenal 2 in the first team. Then if you go across Europe, Barcelona only 2, Real Madrid 1, Italy, I don't know if they're the top teams. I'm wondering, in the long run, could it actually affect the African players themselves? Because even on yourself, before the show started, Torre actually said maybe they should actually look at it. So even the players are actually saying that it should be maybe looked at about moving.
Okay, so in a nutshell, first of all, should the African Cup of Nations be moved, and will it ultimately affect the players themselves, their value? Will clubs want to pick up African players if they know they're going to lose them for a month or so every other January? So, Durosimi, Peter Law, and indeed Andy Brassell, take it away.
Well, I think African players are getting more and more into the top clubs, and fair enough. There's a small number, but that number was 0 maybe 10 years ago. And if you think Manchester United, they may not have any Africans, but they certainly would have had Michael Essien instead of Chelsea from Lyon if they could have afforded him, but they were priced out of it by Chelsea. I think it's a matter of respect to leave it where it is, and obviously our African correspondents will know a bit more about that than me. But I don't really see how it's going to adversely affect the players. And at the end of the day, the managers know the baggage, if you want to call it that comes with the players when they buy them, and they still buy them. So I can't really see that stopping. But as far as moving it being a matter of respect, what do you think about that, Durosimi?
Well, listen, I think Blatter's statement is... he's a friend of Africa, by the way, but his statement about by 2016 is very, very, very unpopular. The majority of Africans are really not in support of that. There is an underlying thing which I keep on mentioning when this argument comes. It's like Africans, forget about football, Africans are now really tired of listening to what Europe has to instruct them to play. That's one problem, separate problem. So the moment, even if it's bad for Africa, the fact that Europe is saying, do this, Africans are saying, at the political scene, you tell us to do this. Don't tell us anything about football. Let us control that. Anyway, that's one issue. Now,
how can they control it when it is he who pays the piper calls the tune? All these African footballers are dependent upon Europe, or the great ones, the best ones are dependent upon Europe for their money, aren't they?
No, the thing is, I just say that because I think it's important to say. It's like, I'm talking about the effects of colonization, the effects of the economy, of African economy, and all that kind of thing. So it's a fact to put on the table. So whether it's the African players, they make their living. I mean, it's like you telling Africa to play in June. It's like you telling Scandinavia, oh, by the way, can you switch your league season, which takes place in the summer? Can you play in December when it's freezing cold? So in Africa, first of all, majority of the areas in Africa, even the World Cup in June in 2010, it's rainy season. It's mild winter in South Africa at that time. So you see the weather conditions then when it changes. So the weather condition, even in North Africa, they play their league season in the European football calendar, that is September to May. And why they don't play in June in North Africa? Because of the heat is very hot in the summer in North Africa. It's not the same kind of summer in Europe. So the weather conditions so January, February, already ideal for the African. Now the African Nations Cup itself has been in existence and has been playing in January, February for a long time, for many years, and it came into existence before the European Championship in 1960, so the Africans started playing in 1957. Okay, economic reasons have forced more Africans to be playing for the big clubs in Europe. So we have 4 big clubs with 4 major managers saying, can the tournament be switched? I think, first of all, it's even wrong for 4 coaches telling a whole continent that their Nations Cup, the most important competition, that is not the way to go. I think it's through dialogue whereby the Europeans meeting with the Africans through the right channels, possibly involving FIFA, I think, which is possibly Sepp Blatter is trying to say, we draw up a calendar. Let's see what suits everybody. I think that's much more of a better approach than for 4 or 5. I mean, after all, I don't see how it affects the African talent if they don't go to play to Europe.
Yeah, but Peter... let me just get Peter Law's view of this. I mean, we're talking world football here. Surely every competition should have some kind of understanding of what the footballers' other duties are. I mean, what's the big deal whether it's played in January or not?
I think part of it, Dotun, is also economic. Besides the weather in Africa, but it's a very important competition to raise revenue for CAF through television. And if it was to be moved to, let us say, June or whatever, if that was even possible with weather, then it would be clashing with a European Championship or possibly a Copa America in certain other years. So people are looking so much at a lot of negatives about this. I would perhaps like to look at a positive of, let us say, Didier Drogba's performances at the last Nations Cup, where he came back absolutely inspired and had a great Nations Cup, and I think Chelsea reaped the benefits.
Andrew in Swanley in Kent, thanks for waiting patiently. Go ahead, mate.
Good morning, Dotun. I'm in Kent because I'm child-minding for my daughter and her husband, so I'm not in Blackheath as normal.
Well, wherever you are, we know you're a gentleman and of course, a Charlton Athletic football supporter, but that's okay for it.
Dotun, you were very kind, just very briefly last week, to be concerned about my ticker.
Oh, yes, of course,
now,
yeah.
Since then, I've had a very big test at St Thomas's Hospital in London, and just very briefly to tell you that I had to go lie down. These two young female doctors told me to strip down to the waist. By the way, I'm going to tell you something. I know you're a hot-blooded bloke. Just take it easy. Keep cool while I tell you this, okay? They stuck a drip into my arm, injected some fluid, and said, look, you feel hot flashes, your heart rate will go to 150. Well, nothing happened, but then they got another contraption, a sort of a ball, and with some grease or something on it, and they started rolling it around the area of my heart, and they were leaning right over me. But I tell you, that gave me a bit of a hot flush, but I survived that. I also survived that West Brom beat us on penalties in the Cup, so I reckon my tick will be okay for another couple of years, so I'll be bothering you for 2 more years at least.
No, I think it'll be 20 more years, it sounds like. Sounds like you're as fit as a fiddle.
After that medical report, I've got a question for Tim.
Go ahead.
Tim, good morning.
Good morning.
I've been beaten by a lady about Pato, so I want to ask you about him, because and I thought he was marvellous. By the way, wasn't it good to see Ronaldo score a couple of goals in that game as well for AC Milan?
And what a help he was for Alessandro Pato. And it does show you. I'm a bit surprised sometimes by the negative publicity that Ronaldo receives, almost treating him as a dilettante, you know. And this is the man who has scored more World Cup goals than anyone else ever, and did it, and won that World Cup in 2002. And take him out of the side, Brazil would never have won it, after coming back from an injury which many people and specialists thought he would never play again. I wondered if he'd ever play again. Wasn't it fantastic to be proved wrong on that occasion?
Well, you've always had faith in him, and I agree with it. One of the best players ever. Now, the other two, Tim, I always remember what you say about young players being too young to come here from Brazil or South America. Apparently, Manchester United are very interested in the two twins, Fabio and Rafael Silva. They're only 17. Surely you must think that they're too young for the hardships of the Premiership. What do you think?
I can understand why United would be wanting to get their hands on them early. As I understand it, they can't move across until they're 18, and they're 18 in July. But the reason that I can understand United's point of view here is that the twins, they're a pair of Brazilian fullbacks. Now, they're very talented, especially Fabio, the left-back. very, very talented player indeed. His all-round game reminds me a little bit of the Argentinian, who I think his career is now next to Over Sodin, who was the captain of Argentina for a while, who was a little fullback who could do anything, and he scored lots of goals with his head, Sodin. And Fabio is the same. He can cut outside, he can and cross. He can cut inside. He scores lots of goals in the air. He's a terrific all-round attacking talent. His brother, Rafael, right back, is not quite as impressive, but again, a very good attacking talent. Now, they're fullbacks. Brazilian football allows fullbacks to develop with no defensive awareness whatsoever. And Brazilian football treats fullbacks really as attackers. Now, when, say, the Brazilian national squad is announced, it's not goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, strikers. It's goalkeepers, defenders, fullbacks, midfielders, and strikers. Fullbacks are in a category of their own. So I can understand it from the United point of view. If they get them over early, they can teach them something about defending that they probably wouldn't learn in Brazil. So I can understand the United perspective.
So Fabio is really as good as that, Tim, yeah?
Well, he was one of the stars of the Brazil side at under 17 level this year in the World Youth Cup, in the World Under 17 Cup. He does look very, very impressive, but obviously at 17, it really is it's a big gamble. And the negative thing from the point of view of the players is that, okay, United take a gamble. If it doesn't come off, fair enough, there's plenty of others to go and look at. But if it doesn't come off from the point of view of the players, it's the only football career that they have.
Tim, before I finish talking to you, you'll know what I mean. Samba is on the way to you in the next few days.
Okay. Oh, he's speaking code. Andrew, thanks a lot for the call. Yes, let's move on. Let's talk some proper African football now. And I put out an APB. It's been answered. Hiral in Uxbridge.
Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
I tell you, it's been a while, Durosimi. I hope you're doing well.
Oh, yes. I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to hold up the fort. The airtime we get on African football dwindles by the week.
Hiral, can I just tell Durosimi that every week that Durosimi is not here, every single week that he's been injured on the bench, you have requested us to bring him back, whether he's got his leg in plaster or not. He's back.
Well, that's good in its own sake. But I tell you what, I've got something to add to that. Which perhaps is sort of ties into this whole debate we're having about the sort of the timing of the African Cup of Nations. I think a lot's been said, and it's funny. It's technically negative publicity, but you know what they say: all publicity is good publicity. And I genuinely believe the interest in the African Cup of Nations has been boosted this time around, not simply by the fact that now we have a lot more players going from the English clubs, also by the fact that everyone's talking about it. So that has been beneficial. But one thing I would like to say is that this isn't exactly charity. The reason why African players are chosen by teams is because they're match winners. It's because you find the best players in the world happen to be African. You name me a defender better than Kolo Toure, you name me a striker better than Samuel Eto'o, name me a midfielder better than Michael Essien, that sort of thing. We have our opinions and all, of course, but that's the way it is. And particularly on this show, for example. Let's say the South American players, the North American players, some of the European players who we see a lot more of in the clubs. They've got great press agents like Tim and Sean and co. Africa produces enough talent, and it's continuing to produce enough talent, and it increases I would say exponentially, so that ultimately the decision of whether clubs will go for African players won't be determined by the fact that they have to leave for 3 weeks every 2 years for a competition that is innately African and belongs to Africa, not anyone else.
And the issue as well is there is this thing they talk about timing. It's not a competition that was created 10 years ago.
Exactly.
You see, so it's not like these Africans have created another competition which is so bad in timing. No, it's been there and it's been played. There's only once. I think Tunisia '94. I think Peter could remember this. I think it was played between March into April, and that was because of either it was Ramadan or some storm or some weather condition earlier on in the year. So, but it's been played within that period for many years. But again, globalization, all this thing that people talk about, economic power. But then you have, say, it will affect the African player if they play. No, in England there's Carling Cup, there's Prometheus Juice Cup, there's so many league cups they play, and it's like the debate is, can you play less football at least, or don't every 23 months can you just spare 1 month winter Don't play football for that 6 weeks. Release your player, get your players who play in the Premiership just to relax. I mean, I know the Spaniards, they complain now they have few African players in France. They lose more but less noise because the French have helped promote the African football since the 1960s, so they understand as well what it means. And there are other clubs as well losing players in Ukraine, in all these other countries. So why are we just hearing from 5 clubs talking about poor timing?
Yeah, well, it's much to do about nothing, really, if you think about it, because every club, has had an influx of African players to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, you see teams like Chelsea and Arsenal, the well-known ones, Pompey, but even Newcastle, Bolton. Name a club. I mean, guys like Emma's Fire now at Reading. You got basically every club. Manucho, the young Angolan boy who everyone's looking forward to watching in this African Cup of Nations, is a Manchester United. So I don't think that argument really has much sway. But I mean, I suppose it'll continue to go on every 2 years because it's something to talk about.
Hiral, you're going to stay with us tonight, yeah?
Oh yeah.
We're staying on till 4:30. I mean, stay on the line and contribute to the. I've always wanted to have you as one of our panelists. You're on tonight, okay? And stay on and contribute and come in. Don't wait for me to ask you to come in. But Peter, the point that Hiral made there about African football as being the best in the world. Now, come on, he's exaggerating, isn't he, Pete?
No, there's an awful lot of A-list African players these days, more than ever.
Yeah, but the best in the world.
Yes. Dotun the best. Huh? I don't know if you watched Samuel Eto'o come back for Barcelona. Tim, please tell Dotun just the impact that Samuel Eto'o has had on that team. This is a guy who, if you watch the reruns of the 2000 African Nations Cup when he was a young boy playing alongside Patrick Mbomo, he was doing it then. I mean, he just didn't have the press agent Alessandri Pato had. He didn't have the press agent.
That's right. He was ripping up trees at Mallorca for many years.
Yeah.
Before he got to Barcelona, and if it hadn't have been the fiddle with him being jointly owned by Real Madrid, he would have gone earlier. But there's no question, Barcelona are not the same team without him, and that's been proved over the last year and a half. It's absolutely incontestable.
I think you've always said that.
I think these days he's got the best press agent in the world. Work overtime for him for free.
No, I think the issue again, I think it's like if you're Brazilian, I mean it sells more. It's like in African football when the European is looking for best African players, they don't go look for Swaziland or some Uganda and somewhere. I think the fact that European clubs will be attracted more with the Brazilian and Argentine. Yeah, so I think it takes time for a Cameroonian to really break into the big limelight like that.
Then why is it that time and time again, the sports commentators from this country, when they're reporting on African games or World Cup games, they always use the phrase, "These Africans are naive players"? Why is that? Why is that?
Dotun, that'll drive any person who has followed African football or knows anything about African football absolutely insane.
But where does it come from?
Well, I think it's a remnant of the past. There was a time when African football was somewhat naive, but just speak to Mr. Yemi, the late great Yemi Teller about naivety, and he would have told you that you're talking rubbish. And
who's this late great Yemi Teller?
This is the man who led Nigeria under-17 team to the World Cup, and sadly passed away not long afterwards. I mean, that is the modern African team. Athletically gifted.
Peter Law, naive. You've heard that phrase as well, haven't you?
I've heard it. It's an old-time, outdated phrase these days. Things have moved on a great deal. I mean, once upon a time, African sides were not so well organized. Nowadays, you've got, I think, more big, high-profile trainers at this competition, more professionals than ever before playing in Europe. There's probably 220 or so of 360-odd players playing in Europe now. A few in North America as well. A couple even as far as Asia as well.
Okay.
So these days, African football has moved along from those days. It's no longer correct in any way, shape or form to call it naive.
You've been listening to a download of the World Football Phone-In from Up All Night at BBC Radio 5 Live. You can put your questions live on Saturday mornings from 2:30am to 4am, or you can email us at upallnight, that's all one word, at bbc.co.uk. That's upallnight at bbc.co.uk.